Welcome to Part 2 of the Title I Part A Within-LEA Allocations training, which covers the allocations that LEAs make to the campuses they are serving with Title I Part A funds. This presentation is intended solely to provide general information and guidance to Texas LEAs and reflects the Texas Education Agency's current understanding of the presentation topics and applicable federal guidance. The content of this presentation is subject to change as a result of further potential information and guidance provided by federal agencies with regulatory oversight of these programs. This presentation does not constitute legal advice, and LEAs are therefore advised to seek legal counsel regarding the information and guidance provided in this presentation before acting on such information and guidance.
Now we will take a look at the steps for determining Within-LEA allocations after reservations have been determined. Now that we've completed steps 1 and 2, we now get to step 3, allocating funds to eligible campuses. Before we begin to examine the allocation of funds to eligible campuses, let's gain a better understanding of some of the phrases I will be referring to in this section of the training. I will be referencing per pupil amount. The per pupil amount is the amount of funds per low-income student that an LEA will allocate to a campus. Campus allocation will also be referenced. The LEA determines the amount it will allocate to a campus, and the amount is referred to as the campus allocation. The campus allocation is determined by the number of low-income students multiplied by the per pupil amount the LEA chooses as per the requirements I will reference in this section of the training. For example, if the per pupil amount that is determined by the LEA for the campus is $1,500, and the campus has a total of 250 students, and 78% of the students come from low-income families, the number of low-income students would be 195. The LEA would determine the campus's allocation by multiplying 195 by 1,500. The campus allocation would be 292,500. We will now take a look at 3 different ways that an LEA may determine campus allocations. We will look at determining campus allocations on an LEA-wide basis, by grade span, and when the 125% rule must be applied. Each description will be followed by an example. ESSA requires an LEA to allocate Title I Part A funds to campuses identified as eligible and selected to participate in rank order based on the total number of public school children from low-income families in each school. An LEA is not required to allocate the same per pupil amount to each participating school. If an LEA allocates different per pupil amounts to participating campuses, the LEA must allocate a per pupil amount that is equal to or higher to campuses with higher poverty rates than it allocates to campuses with lower poverty rates. In this example, we will be taking a look at determining allocations on an LEA-wide basis. The information in the table will contain the following information. Column 1 will include the campuses listed by a letter of the alphabet. Column 2 will include the grades served. Column 3 will include the enrollment for each of the campuses. Column 4 will include the number of students eligible for free and reduced price lunches for each of the campuses, which is the measure of poverty that this LEA chose to utilize. Column 5 will include the poverty percentage for each of the campuses. Column 6 will include the per pupil allocation as determined by the LEA for each campus. And column 7 will include the campus's Title I Part A allocation for each campus, which is derived from multiplying column 4 and column 6. Let's now take a look at the data per campus. Let's take a look at column 5, poverty percentage. Let's determine which campuses meet the Title I Part A eligibility requirements. The LEA low income percentage in this example is 36.2. Let's now take a look at the rest of the data in this table. In this example, the LEA chooses to allocate Title I funds to every eligible campus except campuses I and E, which are the two eligible campuses with the lowest poverty percentages. As per columns 5 and 6, the LEA ensures that a higher poverty school receives a per pupil allocation that is at least as high as a per pupil allocation of lower poverty campuses. Finally, the LEA does not allocate Title I funds to any school with a poverty percentage below 35%. Therefore, the LEA has flexibility to establish a per pupil allocation without regard to the 125% rule that we will cover later. In contrast to determining allocations on an LEA-wide basis, an LEA can choose to determine allocations within grade spans. Grade span groupings for campus allocations do not have to match the grade spans typical for any grade span category. For example, elementary campuses don't all have to be pre-K through 5th. Middle school campuses don't all have to be 6th through 8th, and high school campuses don't all have to be 9th through 12th. There may be various groupings of grade spans within the same grade span category, as seen in this example. When determining campus allocations using the grade span grouping method, the LEA must ensure that it allocates Title I Part A funds to its campuses with a poverty percentage above 75% first. If the LEA has funds remaining, the LEA has the discretion to allocate the remaining funds by grade span. An LEA that opts to serve high schools between 50 and 75% poverty and other campuses 75% poverty and below using grade span groupings may determine different per pupil amounts for different grade levels, so long as those amounts do not exceed the amount allocated to any school above 75% poverty. When determining campus allocations using the grade span grouping method, the LEA also has the flexibility not to serve a particular grade span. However, if a campus within the grade span has a poverty percentage above 75%, then it must be served as per the previous example. Per pupil amounts within grade spans may also vary so long as the LEA allocates higher per pupil amounts to campuses with higher poverty rates than it allocates to campuses with lower poverty rates. Notice that the per pupil amounts are still below the amount allocated to the campus with the poverty percentage above 75%. Keep in mind that when an LEA allocates Title I funds by grade span, the rule that the LEA must allocate a higher per pupil amount to campuses with higher poverty rates than it allocates to campuses with lower poverty rates would apply within each grade span and not across grade spans. That is the reason that in this example, a high school campus with a lower poverty rate than an elementary campus can be allocated a higher per pupil amount. Let's take a look at a more detailed example of determining allocations within grade spans. As I mentioned earlier, the LEA must serve campuses above 75% poverty, regardless of grade span, and before serving any campus at 75% poverty or below. Based on the data in this table, the LEA ensures that it's allocating Title I funds to its one school with a poverty percentage above 75%. After doing so, the LEA has funds remaining and therefore the discretion to allocate the remaining funds by grade span, which includes the flexibility not to serve a grade span. In this example, we will see that the LEA chooses to serve its elementary and high school grade spans only. In the elementary grade span, the LEA allocates Title I funds in rank order of poverty to 4 campuses only. Although there are 8 campuses eligible, the LEA has chosen to only serve the 4 elementary campuses with the highest poverty percentage in the elementary grade span. In the high school grade span for this LEA, the LEA allocates Title I funds to its one high school. The LEA declines to allocate any Title I funds to its middle schools, even though there is one school eligible to receive funds. In summary, consistent with federal law, the LEA ensures that its school above 75% poverty receives a per pupil allocation that is at least as high as the per pupil allocations of all its other campuses to be served. In addition, the LEA uses its flexibility to allocate a higher per pupil amount to its high school with a 36.2% poverty rate than it allocates to the elementary campuses with a poverty percentage of 75% and below. This is allowable, again, because when an LEA allocates Title I funds by grade span, the rule that the LEA must allocate a higher per pupil amount to campuses with higher poverty rates than it allocates to campuses with lower poverty rates would apply within each grade span and not across grade spans. Now let's take a look at the circumstances in which an LEA would be required to apply the 125% rule. As mentioned previously, an LEA has discretion to establish a per pupil amount for each Title I Part A eligible campus, and that amount need not be the same per pupil amount. However, if an LEA has an LEA-wide low income percentage below 35%, the LEA may choose to serve campuses either district-wide or by grade span in rank order of poverty down to the LEA low income percentage. If the LEA chooses to serve any campus below 35% low income, the 125% rule comes into effect. The 125% rule requires an LEA to allocate an amount for each low-income child in each participating Title I school that is at least 125% of the LEA's allocation per low-income child. Determining the LEA's allocation per low-income child is a two-step process. An LEA's allocation per low-income child is the LEA's total Title I allocation before any reservations, divided by the number of public school and private school low-income children in the LEA as determined using the poverty measures selected by the LEA. The LEA then multiplies this per pupil amount by 1.25 to determine the minimum amount per low-income child. In this example, the LEA's total Title I allocation before any reservations is $2.5 million, and the total number of public school and private school low-income children in the LEA is 1,243. Thus, for step 1, we calculate 2.5 million divided by 1,243, which gives us 2,011.26. That is the LEA's allocation per low-income child. However, we must now complete step 2 of the calculation to determine what is 125% of the LEA's allocation per low-income child, which would be 2,011.26 multiplied by 1.25, which equals $2,514.08. Therefore, the 125% rule requires the LEA to allocate at least $2,514.08 per pupil to each school served. Again, the 125% rule is triggered when an LEA decides to serve a campus that has a low income percent below 35%. Let's take a detailed look at an example in the form of a table. As shown in this table, this concentrates the allocations in the LEA's highest poverty campuses, which are campuses A, B, C, and D. School E, which has the highest poverty percentage after those campuses, receives the LEA's remaining funds. Campuses F and G were eligible, but since there were no funds remaining, the LEA was not able to serve them.
There are some additional allocation flexibilities provided by ESSA that we will examine further. Skipping and a related exception. Skipping is an exception to the requirements described with respect to allocating Title I Part A funds to campuses in rank order of poverty. It permits an LEA to choose not to serve or to skip an eligible school that has a higher percentage of students from low-income families if the following 3 conditions are met. The school meets the comparability of services requirement. The school receives supplemental funds from state or local sources that it spends according to the requirements in the school-wide or targeted assistance section of ESSA that meet the intent and purposes of Title I Part A. And the supplemental funds that the school spends from those other sources equal or exceed the amount it would have received under Title I Part A. Before an LEA makes the decision to skip a campus, it must be aware of the statutory requirements associated with a program that meets the intent and purposes of Title I Part A. A program meets the intent and purposes of Title I Part A if the program either is implemented in a school in which the percentage of children from low-income families is at least 40%, is designed to promote school-wide reform and upgrade the entire educational operation of the school to support students in their achievement toward meeting the challenging state academic standards that all students are expected to meet, is designed to meet the educational needs of all students in the school, particularly the needs of students who are failing or at most at risk of failing to meet the challenging state academic standards, and uses the state's assessment system to review the effectiveness of the program. Or, the program serves only students who are failing or at most at risk of failing to meet the challenging state academic standards, provides supplementary services designed to meet the special educational needs of participating students to support their achievement toward meeting the state's academic standards, and uses the state's assessment system to review the effectiveness of the program. If an LEA skips a school, The LEA is still required to use Title I Part A funds to provide equitable services to eligible students who reside in the attendance area of the skipped school. An LEA must determine which school attendance areas would have received Title I Part A funds absent any skipping, as well as what the per pupil allocations would have been. The LEA must then determine the amount of funds that would have been allocated for private nonprofit school children residing in eligible school attendance areas.
There is one other additional flexibility that is provided by ESSA. The flexibility is known as a related exception. In addition to the exception of skipping a campus, there is a related exception that applies if the amount of supplemental state or local funds a campus receives is less than what it would receive under Title I. ESSA permits an LEA to reduce the amount of Title I Part A funds allocated to a Title I Part A campus by the amount of supplemental funds from state or local sources that it spends on programs that meet the intent and purpose of Title I Part A.
Each LEA must maintain documentation to show how the Title I Part A allocations to its eligible campuses are determined. It is highly recommended that the LEA have a spreadsheet that records the following data for all its campuses: campus number, campus name, grade span, total enrollment, number of low-income students, the low-income percentage, the Title I Part A per pupil amount, the Title I Part A campus allocation, and the campus's Title I status. In this example, the LEA has ranked all its campuses by low-income percentage. The one campus that has a poverty percentage that's higher than 75% must be served before the LEA can proceed to serve its campuses that are 75% poverty and below. This LEA has chosen to serve its remaining campuses by grade span. The LEA is providing the campus above 75% poverty the amount of $1,200 per low-income student. It is providing campuses in the elementary grade span with $1,000 per low-income student, and campuses in the middle school group with $1,100 per low-income student. The LEA in this example has chosen not to serve campuses in the high school grade span. In this second example, the LEA has arranged its campuses to show the grade spans more clearly. The campus that is above 75% poverty is ranked first, regardless of grade span, with an amount of $1,200 per low-income student. The LEA then serves its middle schools at $1,100 per low-income student and its elementary schools at $1,000 per low-income student. Again, this LEA chose not to serve its high school group. In this third example, the LEA has two campuses that are above 75% poverty. The LEA has chosen to serve one of these campuses, but has elected to skip the other. This means that the LEA must ensure that the skipped campus meets the comparability of services requirement, that the campus receives supplemental state or local funds to operate a Title I-like program, and that the amount of supplemental state or local funding the campus receives is equal to or greater than the amount it would have received under Title I Part A. Example 4 shows how an LEA applies the 125% Special Allocation Rule. This LEA has no campuses above 75% poverty, so it may group all its campuses by grade span and serve them as far down as the LEA poverty percentage, which in this case is 29.96%. Because the LEA is serving one or more campuses below 35% poverty, the LEA must calculate its 125% per pupil amount according to the statutory formula. The LEA's total Title I allocation before reservations are made is divided by the total number of public school and private school low-income students, and that amount is multiplied by 125%. Every Title I Part A campus must receive at least that 125% amount per low-income student.
This concludes a section of this training that addressed the 3 steps for Title I Part A within LEA allocations, where we looked at Step 1, which is determining poverty counts, Step 2, which is ranking and identifying eligible campuses, and Step 3, which is allocating Title I Part A funds to eligible campuses.
This concludes the Title I Part A within LEA allocations training presented by the Federal Program Compliance Division at the Texas Education Agency. If you would like additional information on the instructions for completing the SC 5000 Title I Part A campus selection schedule, please view the video for the SC 5000 Title I Part A campus selection schedule training. Please contact us with any questions you may have using the contact information referenced on this slide.